and welcome to this training session. We're looking today at how to configure Sage CRM to run with SSL or installing on HTTPS. And so what we'll be looking at in this session is looking at the security advantage for installing Sage CRM using HTTPS rather than HTTP. And we'll also understand the key technical knowledge and skills that are required to install and configure Sage CRM on HTTPS as well. And I'll look in the course of this at some of the places that we need to look if we're troubleshooting as well, but that's an incidental to what we're doing. Sage CRM offers us a variety of different ways in which we can install and deploy the product. So you can either install it as a classic on-premise instance or within a managed environment, so either a private cloud that may be managed by a partner or indeed the customer themselves, or it could be within a virtualized public environment such as AWS or Azure. Now, for the cloud environments, there are going to be local instructions on how to implement IIS security using HTTPS. But here we're going to focus very much more on the classic on-premise approach, as that's going to allow us to have a little bit more of a complete discussion around that and the idea of some of the concepts that we need to consider. Now you can see from this diagram that Sage CRM itself can be configured in a number of different ways to handle security. If you've been on some of the other presentations around the installation, you can understand that really you can imagine Sage CRM being installed only within a corporate network, and so you don't need to think about anything being accessed from within a firewall, or then you can go through a firewall and you can also add in the level of a VPN as well. But here I'm only going to think about really the idea that we need to be able to access Sage CRM from beyond the corporate network. So we need to be able to have some sort of public access for that. And this public access is not just a question of general interface access, although that's going to be very important. Now you can understand that everything that we may want to be able to access through the main user interface from beyond the corporate network is perfectly true. And actually, if we need to do that, it's chiefly because of the needs for mobile. And the mobile is very much a vital factor in businesses now. And so we need to be able to ensure that mobile devices can access the user interface, whether that's through the main user interface or through other interfaces such as the Outlook integration. And so that's one of the other important factors about how we access Sage CRM from beyond the corporate network. And Sage CRM is very much open to API calls. We've got a range of different web services and endpoints for RESTful API calls, or SData calls. The older name is SData. So if we want to be able to integrate with other cloud services, whether those are products such as MailChimp or with Sage accounting products like Sage 300 Cloud or Sage 200 Cloud or Sage 100, then you need to be able to do this securely, and HTTPS enables this. So why do we need HTTPS? Now, I mentioned API, so let's consider some code. Let's consider this starting to create a call that is going to be making a fetch of data eventually. So we're creating a web request that wants to be able to send a request towards Sage CRM. Now this is here you can see I'm adding in headers into the HTTP request, and that's actually in base 64 encoded user credentials. Now base 64 is not to do with security. Base 64, commonly used within the encoding of API requests, simply allows us to represent binary data using only a limited common subset of available characters, and so security is not the intent of the encoding step. Rather, encoding turns anything that is non-HTTP compatible, so characters that may be a little bit strange, that can be used within a username or a password, and it converts any of those characters into forms that are HTTP compatible. And so when we're making a web service request, whether that's through the older SData consumer request, or whether that's actually REST for full create, read, update, and delete rights, those authentication mechanisms requires us to transmit the username and password in each transaction. So unless it is, so encoding doesn't do anything about the security for that, we need to think about how we pass the credentials in flight. And so we have to think about the transfer of user credentials for each transaction in a way that we protect the username and password. HTTPS rather, does this by encrypting it. So as the data moves between the client and the Sage CRM server, it is properly encrypted so that anyone listening in on the conversation can't read anything that is passed. Now that the interception points include IIS, a hacker who may have installed some third-party software either on on your own server or within the IIS, within any of the intervening points on that route, or anybody else who manages to position themselves between the requesting client and the web server. So historically, you had a standard called SSL, which was the standard protocol used by HTTPS. Actually, the newest version of SSL is actually called now Transport Layer Security, so TLS, but SSL is still commonly used. Now, I use that as well, but it's actually TLS, Transport Layer Security. They're very much the same thing. So if any of my articles in what I'm talking here, if ever I mention SSL, technically I'm talking about TLS. And so modern web servers and client browsers all support TLS 1.1 or 1.2, which is all we need at present. And the development team for Sage CRM is actually looking to bring TLS 1.3 support into Sage CRM as soon as possible, but we're dependent on third-party components like Exchange, etc., supporting that. Now, looking at our diagram, we can see that over HTTP, the transport is in plain text and any data can be read and decoded. Over HTTPS, the data is encrypted and protected. The recommendation is that for Sage CRM on any public-facing servers, the communication should be on HTTPS. And so you're going to need to ensure that customers have installed all of the latest Windows updates for their Sage CRM server, and that they've updated all of the client browsers to the latest versions. If you're using a modern browser, then those update themselves. So things you can hear about Chrome or even Edge. Now, I think that all pages on a public-facing server should actually be HTTPS as well, and so that's all of the serving of the CSS files, scripts, images, AJAX requests, etc. Post data and third-party included should all be run and delivered over HTTPS as well. So I would strictly enforce HTTPS and not allow HTTP connections. If you don't do this, you can actually create, as I said earlier on, an opportunity for man in the middle attacks, and a hacker could be able to observe, intercept, and manipulate any of the traffic between the browser and the Sage CRM server, and we don't want that at all. So how do we go about installing and configuring Sage CRM on HTTPS? Well, the easiest thing to do is really to have a sense of wanting to know you're going to use HTTPS before you actually run it. So you actually need to have a sense that you've determined that the production server is to run with HTTPS before you start installing it. But it is actually quite easy to change a site from HTTP to HTTPS if the customer later on decides that they need to have external access. The installation process of Sage CRM invites the implementer to make a choice as the installation is being carried out. And this will allow you to make some changes to the default port and protocol strings that are used for whether it's Outlook or whether it's the main settings. And so these would all then use HTTPS over port 443 for HTTPS rather than HTTP over port 80. Some of the changes that get changed, or some of the things that get changed, would be, say, for example, within the system behavior area. Once installed, you can see here referenced where we've got the idea of custom server name for internal requirements, and see that it's mentioning HTTP rather than HTTPS. And you can see that there would be some changes made to the registry as well. If you look down to where we have got the port, HTTP port, being used there within the registry. Changes to the registry also affect the custom sysparams table, and within the custom sysparams table you can see here the HTTP port and the Outlook port have to be set as well. So that's the port that's going to be used for the communication. But when it comes to things, when we're working with a secure environment, the security is really a web server thing rather than a Sage CRM thing. The main work of enabling Sage CRM to work over HTTPS is to make the changes on IIS itself. That's Internet Information Services itself. That we use HTTPS is a matter for the web server rather than Sage CRM, because after all, Sage CRM is a website, and it's the web server that has to decide how the connection with the client and the server itself is made. This then is the general approach to take. So configuring HTTPS is dependent on a security certificate being installed. And a security certificate is a validation and encryption tool. It's part of the HTTPS protocol, and its job is to secure and encrypt the data going backwards and forth between the server and the client browser. The point about the certificate is that it's issued by a trusted authority. So these trusted certification authorities, sometimes called CAs, verify the identity of the owner of the website. So it's really about allowing the client to trust the server on which Sage CRM is connecting. So it's issued by a trusted certification authority, and the certificate ensures that the user, that the website it's connected to is legitimate and the connection is safe and secure. And basically what we do is we make sure our server has a dedicated IP address, we make sure that we obtain the certificate, we activate the certificate, and we then manually add the certificate to the web server that we're going to be using for Sage CRM, and we create the HTTPS binding for the Sage CRM site. There are some things that we need to do, and this is where we may need to be aware of working with certificates. So, for example, a customer's machine will need to have the ability to work with security certificates. So you need to make sure that the correct components have been installed for IIS. So here you can see I've gone into programs and features, and I'm looking at turning on a Windows feature and turning on centralized SSL certificate support. You may also need, depending on the way in which the server is set up, you may need to be aware of the PowerShell Commands, where you can basically control and work with IIS central certificate providers as well. But this is all very much in the realm of Windows and IIS rather than Sage CRM. This is not a CRM issue. And when we're thinking about this process, there are lots of guides available to take you through the process of requesting, obtaining, installing, and then activating the certificate within inside Sage CRM or within inside the web server that Sage CRM is sitting on. And the Sage CRM System Administrator Guide links to the Microsoft Guide itself for setting up an HTTPS service with Microsoft. And here you can see that this is an extract from the System Administrator Guide that you can find on the help help site for Sage CRM. And so if you follow that, you'll go through to the Microsoft site, and this will explain everything on how to obtain the certificate and copy it to the server, how to import it, to install it, and then bind it to the web server. Now, you may run into issues. If you do run into issues within a CRM context, then, excuse me, those typically may actually be things like the dashboards work internally, but they don't work externally. So they work for users inside. Then if that's the case, so I've mentioned that there are places like custom sys programs to investigate. There's the registry that you may want to investigate as well if something is not working. But in this case, if the dashboards aren't working externally, then you can investigate the way in which the URLs are rewritten for any of the SData requests. SData is the Sage protocol that is used to be able to exchange data in some of the features, such as the mail merge and for data import and export, and also for the dashboards. In here, you can see and start to look at the editing of individual rows, and you can see that you may want to change HTTP host for MyServerName for each redirect. So this is what I was saying in here. So if the dashboards aren't working externally, then you can investigate the URL redirect for SData. And I've changed here, or looking at where I can change HTTP host to match the need for the MyServerName rather than the simple generic what is my host. Okay, let's see if anyone has got any questions.